So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Duncan to do Angular.
So I only just got this picture today, so I have to say thanks to our designer David who whipped up this picture for me today. Who thinks this is a cool picture? I think it's pretty cool. So it's some promotional stuff we're going to be doing, talking about lessons learned from the trenches, which is also our topic tonight, talking about some of the 10 things you're going to need to ask yourself if you are going to go file a new project with an Angular project. And through going through those 10 points, we'll kind of tease out, some of the lessons that we've learned from doing enterprise Angular at SSW. Who's using Angular at work here? Who uses, maybe not outside of work, who's used Angular at home or in projects not at work? Okay, so a fair few people here have used it. And that's one of the great things about doing this user group on Angular. So I'm definitely not up here to tell you that what you see in these slides is the only way you can do it. And I hope that you disagree with me. I had the opportunity to go to the Angular user group over at North Sydney and go through John Papper's style guide. Who's seen John Papper's style guide on Angular? Hands up. Couple of people. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's a great. I think it's got 15,000 likes on GitHub, which is a lot more than stuff like TypeScript and other things, which is interesting. So it's a super popular style guide on best practices with Angular version 1. But what was really cool about this user group was everybody had so many different opinions because we've all been using Angular so much. So don't sit there and just shake your head at me. Just jump in and say how you like to have it, because I also done this presentation in another user group and it was great. We got lots of people talking about their favorite plugins or other sorts of stuff that they're using with Angular. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So this is me. It is a real picture. This is south of Sydney near Jervis Bay. I'm a .NET developer. I spend most of my time actually in the last 6 months working with Angular and TypeScript. Had the luxury to go file a new project, I don't know, 3-4 times. And join in on some projects just at the start as well, so I get to go through these questions. I do have a rope. People always ask me, you just can't see it, it's going between my legs. So if I'm not developing, I'm normally out climbing. It's a good way to mix it up.
Yeah, just leave so much. Nothing, continue.
He'll give you a lesson, Greg.
Yeah, anyone who wants to go climbing, let me know, I'll take you out. It's always a lot of fun. So this is my goal for us. That we can have our front-end code be as solid as our back-end code. And this is something I hear a lot of the time from our product owners. They go, our back-end's super solid. We've got dependency injection, we've got unit tests, we've got some NT or onion architecture. We feel really confident about our front-end's kind of just a big ball of spaghetti, and I wish we had it the same. And Adam always laughs at me, Adam Kogan, saying, this will never happen, we'll never get to this point. But I think it's a good goal to have, and I think frameworks can help us get closer to that. So tonight's agenda, we're going to run through these 10 points. So we're going to talk about whether or not you should use Angular at all. Should you use a single page app, or should you do like mini spars where you're doing a mixture of ASP.NET MVC and Angular. How to structure your application. Will you use TypeScript or ECMAScript 6, which they're now going to be calling JavaScript 2015, and they're supposedly going to be releasing every year and more often. Should you use Bower and NPM, or should you use NuGet? Will you use a task runner and have a front-end build process? How will you secure your application? Which third-party libraries will you use? And how will you get ready for Angular 2? And how are you going to get and stay up to date? So a bit of a brief history. So in 1995, we got JavaScript from Brendan Ikes. That was supposedly written in 2 weeks over at Netscape. Seems like it. And then in 97, we got the formal specification for JavaScript. We got ECMAScript. No one really cared that much. And then in 2002, we got XHR requests. So in 2004, we saw Google come out with Google Maps, and that was kind of a real mind-blowing thing for a lot of people. They saw some amazing UI with the use of Ajax. And then in 2006, we got jQuery, and this was a really interesting time. This was the first time that we saw Microsoft and Google and Apple all come together and agree to use the same tool rather than rolling their own. And it's still arguably probably one of the most popular front-end frameworks, if you call it a framework, out there. 2008, we got the Chrome browser and the V8 engine, and everything. People started getting a lot more ambitious with what they were going to do on the front end. 2009, we got Node.js, which I guess for us .NET developers is important because a lot of the tools we use with NPM and Bower and other sorts of things and task runners can be based on that. 2010, we saw Knockout, and we've still got some projects that we maintain and grow with Knockout, but unfortunately Knockout got knocked out. by this guy. And since 2011, Angular's kind of dominated that front-end space. They're kind of like, and for what you'll see, I'm about to go through why it's so popular and such a solid framework. But I think things are changing. 2015, we're seeing ECMAScript 6 come out. We're waiting for Angular 2 to come out. We're seeing other frameworks like Aurelia come out, and React's getting popular. So I wonder if we're going to see people move away from using Angular, but we'll talk about that as we go. So life before front-end frameworks was very much like this. We ended up in a big pile of spaghetti, too much inline JavaScript, no separation of concerns, poor code reuse. We weren't encouraged to create really responsive apps because it was more trouble to go out of our way to make it happen. And all this means that it's difficult to maintain. So should you use Angular is the first question you're going to need to ask. You go file new project, should I use Angular? You're probably not going, should I use Knockout anymore? But I bet you almost all of us would probably at least think, even if we don't use Angular, it's probably on the cards at the beginning to go, well, maybe we should or shouldn't. It would probably be in the discussion. And I think that the big reason for that is because it's a complete solution. I think that's probably one of the big things about Angular. Out of the box, you're going to get all this stuff. And I'm about to run through some of those. So one example of that would be routing. And being able to manage page refreshes and going back and forward in the browser. You don't have to do any of that. You just get it out of the box. And that's kind of a big highlight of one of the reasons why Angular is so popular. And it's interesting, I was talking with a SharePoint developer the other day, and he goes, oh, I'm learning a bit of Angular, but I don't know why I need to bother. I can do all that with just jQuery. I can do requests and all those sorts of stuff. But I can do a GET request. But if you start to try and do this stuff yourself, it's going to be a fair bit more code to do. So this is one of the reasons, probably the biggest reasons why it's so popular. You get all of this stuff. It's a big buy-in when you use Angular, as a lot of you know, but you get all this stuff. You get a nice MVC structure or MV star or MVVM, whatever you want to call it. You get directives and you get your templates and you get your view model, and then you kind of get this almost like back-end structure on the front end with services and controllers and so forth. And data binding can be quite painful the other way of doing it. If like this is something I wrote just the other day, it's a bit of jQuery to, it's a query selector on something, an element on the page, and then I'm appending some CSS and an alert message, and it works great. It's still good code, but it's not as easy to set up, and you have to write more of it. And then so the benefit of using Angular in that sense and getting two-way data binding is a big, one of the huge benefits of Angular. We get to do stuff like this where we go ng model equals vm.transfer amount, and then we can bind that from the HTML into the controller, and then we've got two-way binding. You hardly need to write much code for it. So it's one of the big benefits. What sort of JavaScript is this? Who can guess? Bit of a trick question. It's not JavaScript, it's TypeScript. Yeah. So you can see there we're typing this as a number and initializing the amount to 0. But I'll talk more about TypeScript in a second. So the two-way data binding is a pretty big part of Angular. The way it does this kind of comparison of the JavaScript, and then it can see if something's changed and it can re-render. So that's kind of one of the big things that make it a compelling story to use. We get lots of services with Angular. This is just one example. We get the HTTP service. So we get this nice syntax like this for doing a GET request and then handling the promise that comes back. We get interceptors, so we can manage, route change success or those sorts of things. And we get the HTTP backend for doing unit testing. So this is just an example of why Angular is so popular. You get so much out of the box with what you get. And then we get directives, and directives for me by far and away is the best thing of Angular. The more and more I use it, the more and more I like the idea of using directives. It just makes things so much better. So this is an example of what you would consider an MVC, like our underscore layout page for a real application. And you can see I've got the main menu here as a directive, and I can abstract all that logic away. And yeah, we can do it in lots of other frameworks, but it's just, when you're used to doing it with Angular, it's very easy, it's very fast. Also got the alerts here for our global alerts for this app, and we've also got the footer. So this code's nice and condensed. It's easy to read, it's very declarative. It's one of the nice things, the great things about using directives with Angular. But this is an example of another app that I work on, and this is, you can't see it on purpose. It's kind of pointing out, this is my like few hundred line Razor page with heaps of logic in the middle of it to say, is someone logged in or not logged in and all that. And I could make it as nice as the other one, but it's not as encouraging as Angular. Angular just kind of lends itself to writing lots of directives and making stuff more declarative and making it more componentized. It's one of the benefits of having this complete solution. We get dependency injection. You can see here an example of what could be a controller in Angular, and we could inject an item service and a shipping calculator, so we get that out of the box. And it's massively popular. You can't argue that Angular is kind of dominating that front-end space. You're seeing banks and lots of big Microsoft products as well using Angular. So that's kind of, with this fast pace of change of things and what are you going to invest your time in learning, is another compelling story for Angular. We get quality code, we get unit tests, we get the ng mock, we get great tooling, we get Protractor and Karma, and a good story around that as well. So if you're going to use another framework, you might not necessarily get as much of this stuff. So why not to use Angular? Well, I think probably the biggest reason not to use Angular would be if your whole business model is just relying on SEO. Like if you're a real estate application and everything is coming down to SEO or something like that, then Angular doesn't really play so well with that. You're going to have to use some sort of pre-renderer to serve up to all the Google bots a pre-rendered version of that HTML. And in .NET, I know there's one library to do it, but it's almost like a ghost town when you look at how many people are using it. But there's some popular ones in the node space. So I think SEO is probably a reason why you might not consider using Angular. I think your team's experience, but that was maybe, what, 6 months, a year ago, it might have been harder to find people who know Angular, but now I think most of the room put their hand up to say they know how to use it. So that's becoming, I think, less of a reason. Maybe if you have a really simple UI as a .NET developer, it's easier to just scaffold it out and use the scaffolding, and it's faster. And we still have some people at SSW who like to do that. They're like, oh, the forms are just going to be faster. The server validation and the client-side validation is just so much quicker and faster for me. They're just admin screens. I'll just use scaffolding. But I don't know. I think once you get used to using Angular, I think it's just as quick. So all of this adds up to kind of meaning you're going to write a lot less code and you're going to be more efficient, and that's going to mean saving time and money. So one of the other big questions you're going to have to ask yourself when you start your application, especially in the .NET space, are you going to do a single page application? You're just going to have one index.html page, and then your whole application goes into there, and then you go on? Or are you going to have mini spars? Are you going to have like sections, or what they call spar islands? So you might have MVC doing the routing, but then you're going to use Angular on some pages, and you might go on to using routing with ASP.NET MVC, and then you come off and do a bit of routing with Angular and back and forth and so forth. Basically, I would say if you're going to be doing a greenfield project, then I would do a full spar. Or if you have an existing API. That's pretty much the route we go down. But we might do a spar island like this, and if we have an existing MVC application. And that can be kind of cool. There's an application that I get to work on that we do basically everything with MVC, but we bring in Angular on that project, so ASP.NET MVC. And you can use Razor as well as using all the Angular bindings and the other things, and it works nice. Even though all the routing, we still do a full page refresh, but it still works. It's surprisingly not that clunky. Is anyone doing that here? How have you found it?
We realised we probably should have done Spark.
Yeah.
Which we're trying to move towards anyway, so the regression.
Okay. Yeah. So that's interesting to hear. So you're saying that you now got it all with MVC, but we should go on the full spar route. Yeah. Yeah. And when you flip between projects, I get the chance to flip on and off a couple of Angular projects, and yeah, when you go trying to find, some of your stuff's going to be on a Razor page in the views folder, and some of your stuff's going to be in another folder with Angular, and it might or might not be in the Angular routing. It gets much trickier to keep a mental map. So how you're going to structure your application is a really important one. So what do you think? Who wants to answer this question for me? What is architecture?
It's the structure of your application. It's the way you design components to put together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's the structure of your application is the response that we had. But I would say I would say architecture is the stuff that's difficult to change. And in putting together this slide deck, I asked a whole bunch of different developers, you've used Angular, what would you want to tell people? And they said, oh man, I really wish the team sat down at the beginning and we all agreed on how we'll do it, because now we've got people making service calls in our views, and we've got some people doing it this way and other people doing it that way. I really wish we'd spent a bit more time up front to get it right, because it's difficult to go back and change all that stuff. So I'm going to show you two folder structures here. One's based on features. So you've got an app folder, and inside there you've got other folders. So we have a people folder. So this is kind of by feature. And inside there we'll have the view and the controller and the routing logic and unit tests, all those things all in that one spot in that people folder, versus doing it maybe by what you'd say by function. So we've still got an app folder, but inside there we've got a controllers folder and a views folder, maybe a bit more classical ASP.NET MVC style. Who prefers the one on the left by feature? Ooh, who prefers the other one by having it by controller? Okay, interesting. Well, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd say, oh, well, yeah. So the response from the audience was almost everybody said they prefer having by function. So you've got like a controllers folder and then all of your controllers in there. And if you asked me 6 months ago, I probably would have said it doesn't matter. You can do either. You listen to Guru Dan Walean talk about Angular, and he would say it doesn't matter which one you do. But if you're watching the space where Angular 2 is going to head and the new Angular router, the Angular router is going to expect to find a components folder by default. And then in there, it's going to expect to find a feature. Say, for example, this would be people. And then it's going to expect to find a people view and a people controller right next to each other. And if you do all that, then the router will just wire it all up for you. So you can, from the looks of it, you don't have to do that, but that's how it's going to be by default. So you're probably better off these days doing the opposite, doing it by feature, if you want to be ready, if you're considering migrating. So this is an example of a folder structure we have on one of our projects. And you can see we have an app folder, and we have things nicely separated out. So we have blocks for all, it's kind of like a commons folder. So in there we've got our alerting service and a bunch of other services we share across the application. We have a business services, which sounds kind of funny to have on the front end. There's usually not too much stuff in there, but this one we've got a few different services in there for doing stuff where we needed to manipulate some objects for some charting and some other things that we didn't want to do on the server. But most of the time you would obviously do those things on the server side. But then we've got a components folder where we put all of our, so for example, you saw in the other one, the people's folder. So any of our views, then we're going to have our view and our controller in there. And then we've got a core folder, and then we've got a data service layer for making all of our data service calls out. And then we have a widgets folder, which is actually probably the biggest one. So moving more and more towards having lots and lots of directives and putting most of your functionality in directives and kind of more componentized for the app. So I think at the moment we've got, like in this project, there's like 4 times more directives than there are pages for the application. So each page has like 2 or 3 directives at least on them. And most of the views and controllers end up almost being placeholders. They just initialize a couple of values and pass them over to the directives. And this is what the rest of the folder looks like. And we're going to be running through some of the directory. We've got a lot of our config files. So our config for our setting up our task runners and our package managers and our TypeScript and our linting tools and our templates for our HTML pages and so forth. So this is the style guide that I mentioned before by John Papa. Oh, you got a question?
So how do you, in the previous one, so you got Gulp and running something like that to build this thing?
We'll actually give you a microphone.
You get Gulp running to do like a minification and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So now the app folder on the left side is only for development, right?
Only for this project?
No, only on development time to organize the stuff.
Sorry, I can't hear the question.
Sorry. Is it only for development time? Like as you develop, this is giving you a structure on when you develop. But when it's served, is it going somewhere else? Is it going into the script folder or something? The Gulp?
So it depends on the project. In this project, we're packaging up all of our stuff in that app folder, and we're pushing it into what we're calling a dub root folder, which is like what we're then deploying off for this actual project off to the server or to our production. But and that's the way the ASP.NET 5 stuff's going to go. You're going to have this public folder with root. So yeah, that's like our development space, and then we take out of that what we want and get all of our assets and get it ready for production. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think you can see it here because it's dynamically made. It's actually a hidden folder, the root folder that we generate. But if I'd shown hidden files in Visual Studio, you would see a root folder here that gets shipped off. Yeah. Yep. That's this project. Yeah. But that's the way it's kind of moving with ASP.NET 5. So we kind of did that for this project as well. So this style guide's really, if you haven't seen it, it's a must. This is a bit of an old picture. It only has 7,000 stars, but it's much more now. It's well worth having a look at by John Papper on GitHub. We don't tend to use templates so much more at SSW. Even though they can be great, they can be fast. You can get a lot of existing structure to copy. So who's seen John Papper's hot towel template? Only a couple of people. It's something we've used a couple of times. He's got one for MVC, like ASP.NET MVC that you can get. And it used to be something you get from NuGet, and it was great. But then even if you just watch how much that's changed, and John Papper and Angular and everything's changed over the last year, his Node version now is completely different because of task runners and NPM and all this stuff. That these things just change too quick and it ends up not being worth it. A lot of them aren't ready for Angular 2. None of them are using TypeScript. And I find I spend more time just pulling stuff out than I actually get benefit from them. And it becomes redundant pretty fast. This may change in the future. We might get better templates, but at the moment we tend to roll our own and just go file new project because it saves us headaches. So this question is an interesting one because I think we're all going to have to ask this question now. Should we use TypeScript or ECMAScript 6 or what we're calling JavaScript 2015? I think you're going to be using one or the other for Angular in the future, and you probably should be using one or the other now. And we heavily fall towards TypeScript for some reasons I'll run through, but I think in Angular 2 you're going to be using one or the other. You can use ECMAScript 5, but you're going to write heaps more boilerplate, and it's probably not only the die-hard people who hate the new syntax and language changes are the ones who are going to use it. So everyone's going to have to make this choice. So you're going to have to weigh up in your head what are the things you like about TypeScript and what are the things you like about using transpilers like Babel so that you can transpile your JavaScript 2015 into ECMAScript 5 so that the browsers can use it. We're all going to have to make this decision. Are we going to use TypeScript and compile that down to ECMAScript 5 for the browser, or are we going to use Babel and have no type checking? So that's what TypeScript brings to the table is the biggest thing. It's a typed. Who's using TypeScript in production? Okay. Who's ever played with TypeScript at all? Okay. So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. You're going to get not just type checking. You get some other things I'll run through, but that's kind of the big thing of it is you get this type checking. You can say something is a number, and if you try and make it a string, your IDE is going to complain at you. But it compiles to just straight JavaScript, which is a big difference. And for this reason, it's much more like a volume dial. You can have it down really low. You can just change a JavaScript file from .js. You can just say, okay, if I'm in Visual Studio, which will compile it for you, you don't have to do anything. You can just change it to a .ts file, and then you've got TypeScript. And usually all the JavaScript you wrote is now valid to be on that TypeScript file, and it just works. And you don't have to do anything else. And you can just do one file and leave the rest of your project as JavaScript and slowly move across. It's not this fixed thing where you have to all of a sudden do everything at once to use it. And the volume control as well is much more about how strongly typed you're going to have it. Do you want to have an interface for everything and everything's going to be strongly typed and it's going to be much more enterprise level ready TypeScript application, or are you going to keep the volume down and it's much more fluid and you're kind of manipulating objects much more like we would in JavaScript now. So you've got lots of options with it, which is great. You can kind of pick and choose and take the bits you like. And of course, Angular 2 is being written in TypeScript. The Microsoft team and the Google team are coming together on that one. So I think at that point, the whole world's getting much more interested in TypeScript, and we're going to see a lot more cool tooling with it. And it's going to be, probably a better experience to use TypeScript with Angular 2. Although using Babel, which is the main competitor for transpiling your ECMAScript 6 to 5, now supports a lot of the things TypeScript was going to be unique, like decorators and things like that for your classes. So this is an example of what a controller would have looked like before. In Angular 1, we've probably all seen something like this, where we're initializing the controller at the top, or registering this controller with Angular, and then in the red we've got a function, and inside there would have all of our business logic. There's not much business logic in this one, but that's where we would put it. Whereas if we were doing Angular 2, it's going to look like this. So we've got this JavaScript class, and inside there we're going to have all of our business logic in there. So one of the good ways of getting ready is using TypeScript and using these classes, which is kind of TypeScript's been doing for ages. It's not a new thing for it. Then that's going to be an easier way of getting ready to migrate to Angular 2, because you're already writing that syntax and it's going to be easier to pull your business logic across. So at SSW, we like TypeScript because you're going to get that static type checking. But for me, I think the static type checking is awesome, especially if you're getting to some of the size of our projects are, like, 100,000 lines of JavaScript or something like that. It gets crazy. So that's a big part of it. But the tooling is really awesome. If you ever have to refactor with TypeScript, it's a real pleasure. Being able to right-click and rename by symbol versus just doing a search for strings is awesome. Having IntelliSense with your JavaScript or with your TypeScript. So you bring in what's called a definitely typed file. You have to go off and get these. And then they're on GitHub. There's a very popular whole section of getting them for libraries like jQuery or Angular or Moment. And you suck them into your project. And then you can go Angular dot, and it will tell you all the options you've got, like you're used to getting with your C#. So that's really cool. That's one of the big benefits of it. And you get other things. You can do F12 and go to definition and lots of stuff. You get interfaces, which you're not going to get in ECMAScript 6. So one of the other benefits of using TypeScript, because there's some pains in the butt using TypeScript, which I'll tell you as well in a second. It's always a juggling act of which one you'll choose, is that you're going to also get these things that they're not going to bring out in ECMAScript 6 or 7 or JavaScript 2016 or 17, whatever they end up calling it. So one example is interfaces there. So you can have interfaces for your TypeScript. And you'll be Angular 2 ready. So what are the downsides? Sometimes it feels like you're smashing a square peg in a round hole using TypeScript with Angular 1 right now. So directives are a bit awkward when you're writing a directive in TypeScript for Angular 1, but it'll be completely different for Angular 2 because it's kind of designed to use TypeScript. Also, how strictly will you type stuff? Like, it's not like everything's going to be strongly typed. It's up to your team to decide how strongly typed you want it to be. So if you've got OCD or CDO, which is OCD in the right order, then you'll struggle to go, well, this is typed, but that's not typed, and then I'm going to turn this into an any, but so I watch some developers go, oh my God, I don't want to, it's got to all be typed, and they'll spend heaps of time trying to turn JavaScript into a really typed project where everything's got an interface, and that can be fantastic, especially if you've got a really large code base, but sometimes this is something that bugs people. Integrating with third-party tools, like right now with TypeScript and Angular 1, most of the demonstrations online are all going to be in JavaScript. But that's changing, and I think you'll see that most of the demonstrations for Angular 2 are going to be in TypeScript, so it'll be different. But that is one of the pains. If you're using a Kendo grid and you want to write a bunch of directives for it, and you want to just quickly go Google and see what some other people have done, it's always going to be in JavaScript. You won't find a TypeScript demo. So that's a bit of a pain, but you get around it and you get used to doing it. It's a pretty steep learning curve using TypeScript, but like I said, we're all going to go through a steep learning curve with JavaScript 2015 or ECMAScript 6. So whether you do that with TypeScript at the same time or you don't, I think you just start playing with them and see which one you like. But it's rare that I meet.
You might want to mention each time we've done it in Fire Bootcamp, the velocity has been nothing for that sprint.
Yeah. So Adam's just mentioning we run a 9-week course called Fire Bootcamp, and we get a group of people who want to improve their web development skills together for 9 weeks, and they build a real-life application, and they do a bunch of coursework at the same time, and we do sprints every week. And the velocity for the guys going through that course when we introduced TypeScript was basically nothing happened that week. It stopped. It was just a week of trying to understand TypeScript and implement it with Angular. But that said, that was like before anyone was using, there was no documentation online. We had to come up with all our own ways of doing TypeScript in Angular 1. But now there's lots of there's at least 2 good Pluralsight courses, if not 3 on TypeScript, and there's more documentation around it. So it's not as painful now. You can kind of get a good feel very quickly of how to do it well. Whereas before we were just figuring it all out ourselves. Who's using, so Bower and NPM versus NuGet, which package managers are you going to use for your front-end libraries? Who's using NuGet for bringing in things like Angular and Moment and jQuery, that sort of stuff? Still, you know, a good handful of people. Who's using Bower and NPM? Okay, so about a mix between the room. So the way that it's going now, you look at Microsoft and you look at Visual Studio 2015, basically if you're going to use NuGet, that's going to be where you go to get your C# libraries. And if you're going to get something that's a JavaScript library like jQuery or Angular or Moment, then you're going to get it from Bower or NPM. And so Bower tends to be the place where we go and get all of the front-end libraries we're going to use, like Angular and jQuery, but we use NPM, which is the Node package manager, to go get things like Gulp plugins for our task runners and so forth. And a lot of people now are kind of asking, why do we need two package managers? Why do we need Bower, and why do we also need NPM? Why don't we just use NPM, because it can do the job as well? And I think there's a trend towards that. It's definitely not the way it happens now. At the moment, everyone's still going to Bower, but it looks like that could potentially happen where Bower becomes less of a deal, because people try and simplify that space and just go to one spot to get all their packages. But I definitely am not seeing people do that. And we definitely don't do that, because there's some really cool plugins for your task runners to automate a lot of stuff based off your Bower file. So we still use Bower. And one of the reasons you get the latest version, the people at Microsoft had to actually manage NuGet and go, oh crap, someone updated the library. We better now go update our NuGet. So it wasn't always in sync. You get a lot of cool tooling. It's much easier to install. You get a lot more control with these things. Some of the downsides of the command line tooling can be a bit, if you're going to, you end up in the command line a bit more, might take you out of the IDE, but I don't really mind that. And there's a fair bit more setup the first time, especially when you start using a task runner, which we'll get to. So these are the three we use. So we use NPM, like I said, for, say, if we need to go get any of our dev dependencies like a Gulp plugin. We use Bower for all the front-end stuff. And we use the definitely typed package manager. So that is where you go get your TypeScript definition files, so you get IntelliSense for your TypeScript, for your third-party libraries. Who uses NuGet to go get those definitely typed files? A couple of people. Who uses the definitely typed package manager to do it with the command line? Yeah, about a mix of the people who do use it. I find this great because you end up with a config file and your folder structure that's the same as you do with Bower and the other ones. So you go tsd install Moment for my dates, and now I've got IntelliSense for that, and it will pull down. And if another developer comes onto the project, they do tsd install, and it just brings down all the things that they need for that. So they're the trio we tend to use at the moment. So who's got a front-end build process at the moment? Who's using a task runner? Only a few people? Okay. So I think if you're not using that, you're really missing out. It's a fantastic thing to have, because you can automate so many processes, and the first time you do it can be a real pain because you've got to learn how to set them up, and you can sink a fair bit of time in it, but once you get your head around them, they're great. You can go, oh great, I wish I could move this file over here every time I build my Visual Studio solution, and then when I build it, I wish I could minify everything and concatenate it and push it into this folder. First time's a real pain in the ass, but then the second time you're just like, and you can go through it and get it done. But this is something we're seeing come into ASP.NET 5 quite a lot. And it's something you're going to need to know, because even if you, at the moment, if you go file new project, you've got this dub root folder, and they'll give you Gulp out of the box for it. And they will have already put these third-party libraries in that dub root folder, which is your public folder, because otherwise your browser won't be able to get to them if they're not there. But then you go bring in another library into your project when you're playing around with it, and they haven't got any tasks there for it to then be pushed into the dub root folder. So you try and use it, and it's not there. So you're instantly going to have to know Gulp or Grunt to go use ASP.NET 5 if you were to go file a new project at the moment. So it's something we're all going to have to start using if you're not already. So these are the two popular ones. You're seeing Microsoft go towards more Gulp at the moment by default, but before it was Grunt. Just out of interest, who's using Grunt? One person. Who's using Gulp? Yep, probably 4 or 5. So Gulp's the more popular one at the moment, and most of that's based on performance because it's stream-based versus Grunt, which is file-based. So every time you do a task with Grunt, you're going to have to read and write to file, whereas with Gulp, you could do several tasks in a row and just stream those. So that's one of the big benefits of it. It's also code over configuration, so it feels more normal for us developers when we're using it, whereas the other one's configuration over code. And there's about 1,500 versus 3,000 plugins by the time I did this slide, but I don't know if that's here nor there. Every time I go looking for a Gulp plugin, which is the one we use, there's always a Gulp plugin for it. So that's definitely the way that we're using Gulp, and it's by far and away seems to be the most popular one at the moment. But in the future, we'll see things change. Who's using Webpack? No one? Which is another library that does a bunch of different stuff. It also does a bunch of bundling for you as well. And there's another library called, who's heard of JSPM? Yep. So JSPM is a really interesting one to watch. It's a package manager, but it also does all of your module loading as well for you in the browser, and does some bundling. It's still really early, but if you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. It's pretty cool, the stuff that I think we'll be doing a lot of this stuff very differently in 6 months' time. I think Gulp will become something we'll use, but a lot less of. So a lot of our asset management and bundling and all that stuff will be much more automated by these newer tools, and Gulp will be more about kind of packaging things up and renaming and moving around than it is about getting your assets on a HTML or something. We got the Visual Studio Task Runner Explorer that comes out of the box in 2015. I didn't think I was going to use this that much. So if you're using Gulp, you can get a task like this, and you can bind it to a before build event like so. So you go Control-Shift-B and you build your Visual Studio, and it'll execute one of your task runners for you. And it works with Grunt or Gulp. I thought it was kind of tacky, but now I really like it. I probably use it most of the time over firing up the command line for the general stuff that we do. And it's kind of nice also for debugging a little bit as well, because you can kind of click on it and run it and don't have to type as much. But I don't know. Who else has used this? Like it? Don't like it? Yeah, it's so convenient, absolutely. Yeah, but I was surprised that command line's not too difficult for this stuff, but it is useful. So how are you going to secure your application is point 7. And I'm not going to go into a big story here about this, but it's something that security can be quite difficult the first time you do it with Angular. You got no page refreshes. You're going to end up using tokens versus cookies. Your security is you've got an option to do security as a service. So you could go to a company like Auth0, which has got quite a cool setup for doing security as a service. So basically you'll pay them and they'll have a server for all of your security, and they've got great libraries and extensions for everything. So the other day I wanted to do ASP.NET 5 as a file new project just for a demo we're doing, and I wanted to secure the web API with it, and I wanted Angular on the front end, and basically it spun up 2 hello worlds for me of those, and I just downloaded and then I was done. So, but it's got to meet your business model. Because you have to pay for it. If you've got lots of users and it doesn't fit quite in the right bracket, then you price yourself out straight away. But still, most of the time we build our own. But that's interesting. Auth0 is worth checking out. And there's lots of things to consider. There's refresh tokens. You've got mobile applications. The first time you do it takes a bit of time to set up. And I think we always still underestimate how long it's going to take us with all the security stuff with Angular. We were estimating in a sprint planning session the other day, and all we needed to do was make a small change to bring something back on when someone's authenticated to be able to use. And everyone was like, oh yeah, I think it's probably a 3 for effort or something like that. And I said, no, it's definitely going to be more. And everyone goes, why? It doesn't look that hard. And I think because it just always seems to take longer. So I don't know, that's my kind of tip. I think if you're going to be doing anything with security with Angular, give yourself a bit of extra time. So we're up to point 8. We're almost through these ones. And we're going to be talking about which third-party libraries you should use. And at SSW, we use these ones. So we use Kendo. Who loves Kendo? Really? 2 people? I asked this to... Oh, you love it. So Kendo is really interesting. I asked this at the Brisbane User Group the other day. There was a fair few people. There was like 60 people, and no one put their hand up. But if you ask people, does it get the job done? Does it look good? And does it get you over the line? Yeah, it always does. You know, you might have to beat your head against the table a bit, but it gets there and you write great applications with it. And I guess that's why a lot of us still use it. But who hates it? You can't love and hate it. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. People often feel quite emotional about Kendo. But cool thing about Kendo is it's got a full suite of Angular directives. So you can, if you're using it with Angular, it's fantastic. You know, it's very good for doing that. Angular UI and Angular Strap are two separate libraries that you can use for if you're using Twitter Bootstrap for your UI framework, and that wraps a lot of that Bootstrap things in directives, so you get a nicer, more declarative syntax when you're using things. Rather than going class of alert, you can just go, this is a alert, and make the element an alert element. So that can be quite good. Who's using Angular UI? Okay. Anyone using Angular Strap? Which is, there's the logo. One person? Have you used both?
I know we're using Angular Strap, but I don't remember what for exactly.
Okay. It's surprising how much of a pain in the butt some of these decisions can be. I really think next project, depending on which things I want to get for it for the project, I think I would have a look at both of them and make a decision rather than just defaulting always to Angular UI like I have in the past. Because this last project, we wanted to do this simple thing where we wanted to programmatically close a popover. So the popover had a fair bit of logic in it, had a form and you could do stuff. And then we just wanted to close the popover when we get a response back. And that was a real pain in the butt, surprisingly. And there was this huge trail through GitHub of all people having the same problem with it. And most people just said, oh yeah, just use Angular Strap for it. And the same again, we had this off-canvas menu and we ended up having to do a bunch of custom changes to another person's third-party library, whereas if we'd used Angular Strap, we would have gotten it. So it's worth having a close look at these, which one you'll use, because there's certain things in both that are good. We use Lodash a fair bit. Lodash is like a JavaScript utility belt, allows you to do a whole bunch of kind of link-like things that you'd do in C# on the front end for looping and creating new objects and mapping new objects and plucking out one value or different things like that. Use it every day, it's fantastic. There's another similar library called Underscore, they're both great. We use D3 charting when you want to make something a bit more amazing than just a bar chart. Yeah, so that's a great one to check out as well. Is there any I've missed? Is there any third-party libraries people can't live without for Angular that they want to? Angular Material, yep. So Angular Material is like Twitter Bootstrap for Angular, and it's based on the Material design spec. Are you using it in production?
No, just like they
Yep. Yeah. Infragistics with Angular? Okay, I haven't tried them, so that's cool. Yeah, Angular Material is an interesting one. I haven't met too many people who are using it in production yet. I hear they've got a few performance issues around it. And they don't have anything for Angular 2 yet, which is crazy. So if you want to style your Angular 2 site, you'd think you'd go straight to Angular Material, but you can't yet because they haven't ported across to Angular 2. It's still only for Angular 1. So how are you going to get Angular 2 ready? Who's excited for Angular 2? One person? Two people? Why are people not excited for it? You're not. Yeah. Any other reasons why you're not excited? Or you just haven't had a chance to use it yet? Yeah, it's going to be really different. Who's moved my cheese, man? That's what some other people were saying. And I think it's opening up this space where people are going, well, if we're going to be waiting till probably January till we get it, maybe we should look at using something else. I think it's an interesting time for Angular. I think that people are kind of going, oh, it's going to be totally different and there's other frameworks. Maybe we should start looking at React. It's an interesting one. That.
So for a beginner, if you want to learn Angular, is it okay? Is it a prerequisite? I mean, Angular 1.2, is it a prerequisite?
It's fine, thanks. 1.2.
What's that?
If I want to learn Angular 2 directly, so is it a prerequisite that I need to know Angular 1.2? I mean,
do you need to know Angular 1 to use Angular 2? Yeah. I think it's going to make a huge difference. So Angular 2 is meant to be a lot easier to use, and it's got the whole goal of Angular 2 is to, one, be more performant, but have a much smaller mental map. So when people are learning Angular, it's easier, because at the moment you've got to learn directives and all these new sort of syntax and other sorts of things they've got. So that's their goal, that it's going to be easier. So you could wait and just learn Angular 2, but if you already know Angular 1, it's going to be a much, much smaller jump to Angular 2 than someone who has to learn the whole Angular 2 framework. Much smaller, because you'll already be used to routing and controllers and directives and components. And so I wouldn't hold off. You know, if everything you learn in Angular 1 will still help you in Angular 2, even though it'll be very different. Yeah.
Thank you.
How well do you think they'll both play together? I mean, the biggest issue we've got now is every 30 seconds, from an enterprise point of view, there's a new library of some description. You're expecting your code to last 5 years, and generally it doesn't.
Yeah, I was about to say 5's generous.
Right. So if you've got large amounts of code, how do you think this Angular 2 is going to fit and try to be slotted in with the investment they've made in Angular 1 and other libraries?
I think we're going to see Angular 1 last for ages, because so many people have huge code bases in it now. And I've heard that you'd be able to have two of them in the same place, but I'm not sure how Angular 2 and Angular 1 in the actual same project is going to behave together. I can't answer that. But I think you're going to see people just draw a line in the sand and say, no, this is just a 1, we're not going to migrate, and we're just going to maintain it for ages. And some people will try and migrate. So it's a watch this space. I mean, it's still alpha for Angular 2, and they still change all the time. And if you try and play with it and do file new projects, I've been playing around with it a fair bit, it breaks all the time. So I'm not so sure yet how easy it's going to be. I think people will probably just leave their stuff in 1 because it's so robust and works well, and then they'll have 2 and it will just be very different. Yeah.
Might mean the uptake on 2 just doesn't happen.
You think? Yeah? So you think maybe Angular 2 will never get there, it'll fall over, there'll never be a final release?
Well, more, it looks quite good, but we've seen in many times in the last 20 years, that transition from microchannel architecture on IBM, where they thought that they owned the market, and then suddenly the world didn't follow them. Yeah. And there's countless examples since then where we got up and said, yeah, we've got massive momentum, and it was the momentum that killed them in the transition.
I think that could happen here, because most Angular developers are like, it's a split. Some are excited by it, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's just totally different. I'm not that keen. It's not the Angular that I use and love. So that might happen. Who knows?
New product.
Yeah, it's a new product. It's totally different. Yeah, solving similar problems but totally different. But if you are interested in being ready for it, well, I guess what are the things that are missing? There's no module loading story in Angular 1 that's easy. The directives are kind of take a fair bit of time to get your head around. The performance could be better, and having an easier mental map. So this is kind of what they're looking to make better. They're making it faster, simpler. It's going to be backed by the Microsoft TypeScript team, and of course still Google. So I don't know. I think there's still going to be a lot of people using it, but it is an opportunity for change that might shoot them down. It would be interesting to watch. So how to be ready for it? I think using TypeScript or ECMAScript 6 classes is one of the key things. There's no reason not to be using TypeScript or JavaScript 2015 or ECMAScript 6, whichever one you want to call it right now. We're going to be transpiling for a long time, the JavaScript or TypeScript we're writing right now, so I wouldn't hold back. It's ready to go now. I would use the new router that was meant to come out in 1.4. That's going to be the same router they're going to use in Angular 2, and it's meant to come out in 1.5, but I've got a feeling that it won't come out in 1.5 because they're kind of, you listen to them talk about it. I listened to an interview with the person making it, and I think they've kind of underestimated how big a challenge it's going to be to make the new router work with the other Angular. So it might not come out in 1.5, but if it does, then I would use it. But everybody's still using the Angular UI router, seems to be the most popular one and is excellent to use. So a lot of people, almost everyone's using the Angular UI router at the moment. I would use a component-based project structure. So like I showed you before, where you have a folder for components, and then inside there you've got a feature folder called people, for example, and then you've got a view and a controller next to each other. I think that would be the way I'd structure my application. I'd make sure I have a front-end build process, because that's going to become more and more important, and it just makes development so much more fun. And I would componentize your app as much as possible. I think we're going to see Angular 2 be a lot more about components. So what I would do is I would get more directives, so you're passing your data to your directive and your directive's doing all the work versus kind of binding all that onto your views and controllers. That's fine to do, but I would move further and further down the road of doing directives for most of the stuff that I'm doing. So how do you get and stay up to speed with Angular and Angular 2 and all the things that are coming? Well, there's some great resources for that. We've got some at SSW. Oh, shameless plug, you could build on one of our projects. We've got on-site training. We have Dev Superpowers if you haven't checked it out. We've got some great ones on there. We've got some interviews on SSW TV. I think Pluralsight will continue to be probably a great spot to go learn Angular. At the moment, they've got so much stuff coming out all the time about it. This is the new Angular website, angular.io. So if you want to go see the Angular 2 stuff, you go here, not to their normal documentation site for all the Angular 2 stuff. So they've got some demonstrations on there, and you can go file new project and follow along a few things. But there's still big gaps. You know, they've got the list of all the stuff that's going to be in this section of documentation, and then you click on it, and then it's just blank. So it's definitely far from finished. And Egghead.io, I think, is pretty cool. They're going to be presenting some sold-out talks on Angular 2 at the next conference in England. I think it is in October. So I think these guys will probably be some of the first people on the street with all the Angular 2 videos. So it'll be interesting to see. I also have another plug for Adam. Do you want to talk about this, Adam, the Brain Quest?
Yeah, I might talk about just at the end.
Okay, cool. So we'll come back to that. Also have another plug for a course. We're going to have a 2-day workshop. We haven't got it up on the website yet, but if anyone's interested, come have a chat to me. Adam Stevenson and I are going to be doing a 2-day workshop on Angular 2 in Visual Studio with ASP.NET 5. So we've already been banging our heads against the table, learning all that stuff. So if you want to save yourself 2 weeks of head banging, then come along to this course. Come have a chat to me afterwards. We've already got the dates lined up: Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane.
Roughly when?
November, December. Yep. So in summary, I would say that you should use Angular. At the moment, it's still the dominant force, Angular 1 point something, whichever version you're using in 1x. I'll do full spars where you can. I'll take your time to get your architecture right up front, and I'll use a style guide for that. Use TypeScript. Use Bower and NPM, not NuGet, for your front-end JavaScript libraries. Use Gulp for your build process. Allow extra time for security. Use Kendo, Angular UI, and Lodash as some of the great ways to speed up your development with Angular. Be Angular 2 ready with TypeScript, and stay up to date with our help. So hopefully we end up in this position. Adam's smiling. Mr. Kogan probably thinks that it's not going to happen, but maybe one day JavaScript will be less loose. We'll see. So thank you very much, guys.